let's get started. This is the first in the series of webinars which would assist NET JRF aspirants to clear their NET exams, and also it would assist in their preparations. Today we will be dealing with research aptitude and reasoning. So first session will be about research aptitude. So let's get started right away. The first question that needs to be answered is, what is research? Research is nothing but a scientific investigation or search for knowledge. Or in simple terms, you could say that research is a systematic approach to finding answers to a number of questions. And according to Learner's Dictionary of English, research is defined as a careful investigation or inquiry, especially through search for new facts in any branch of knowledge. As we all know, the nomenclature is generally divided as re and search, where re means again and search is you search for new facts and knowledge. Moving on to the next is objectives of research. The objectives of research are always in line with the different types of research. For example, if I say a research aims at finding out causal relationships, then it means that the research is a causal research. And again, if I say that a research aims at finding out market trends or the psychology behind people buying few products and all that, that comes under market research. So generally, or speaking in broader terms, the objectives of research are as follows. Research helps in gaining new insights, finding out characteristics of objects and individuals, finding market trends, solving specific problems in the society, finding out causal relationships, and also to prove and disprove with an existing idea or theory. The next is characteristics of research. So what makes something research? You call something research when it is scientific. Scientific meaning to say that there is a systematic process or a step-by-step process which is carried out. The second is validity. You say a research is valid when the results are what the research aimed at. Or in simple terms, you could say that when a research aims at finding out, or a research finds out what it aims to, is called as validity. For example, if I aim at finding out the impact of diabetes in the younger lot or in the younger generation, then my results should be in accordance with the objectives which I have decided. So that is called as validity. Moving on to the next is reliability. Reliability is when the results are constant, irrespective of the researcher. Supposing if I research a particular research problem today and I get few results, the results should be the same as it would be if another person were to do the same research. Alright. The next is generalizability. Generalizability is how much, it refers to the extent to which the results can be generalized. Generalizability is the extent to which you can generalize your results. Supposing if I am working with a particular group of people in mind, say I am working based on the low income group, or I am working on the low income group or their lifestyle or anything like that, my results should be generalizable to all people belonging to the low income group. Alright. The next is objectivity. Objectivity is something that is unbiased. It is important for research to be unbiased. The next is accuracy. Accuracy is the degree of correctness. It is necessary that research is accurate. The last is empirical. Empirical is anything that can be tested and verified. And as we all know, research is something, as I already told you in case of reliability, research is something that needs to be tested and verified. Therefore, empiricality is also an important characteristic of research. Moving on to the characteristics of a researcher. What makes a person a researcher? A researcher is a person who has well cultivated curiosity, meaning to say that he is inquisitive but in the right sense. Alright. The next is patience and tenacity. It is important for a researcher to be patient and also perceiving at the same time. I mean to say that research, as we all know, is quite a lengthy process for say about 4 years or 5 years. It is important that the researcher has the same amount of perseverance to continue to go on with the same research problem till the end. Alright. By genuine interest, we also mean to say that the interest is supposed to be sustained, and also everybody needs a lot of common sense, but in case of a researcher, it is needed in larger amounts. So a good ideas with a lot of common sense is also a requirement or an attribute of a researcher, and also a sense of social responsibility. So why do we need social responsibility? As we all know, ethics are an important and an integral part of research. For any researcher to be ethical, it is also required that the researcher has some sense of social responsibility. This is just so that the researcher does not manipulate or tamper the results. Alright, moving on, the types of research. Up on your slide is a link to a YouTube video which we have uploaded recently. It is on the types of research. I suggest that you watch the video, but I also would like to give a brief outline of each of the research types in a line or two. The first is descriptive research. Descriptive research are nothing but fact-finding surveys. For example, I am a researcher and I want to find out what is the soap that people buy the most. And probably I will have a questionnaire which asks you, what soap do you use? So there will be people who say, might be 10 people use Dettol, 10 people use Lifebuoy, 10 people use Hammam or anything like that. So these researches are basically fact-finding researches. You just tend to find out how much or what is the present state. Okay, so all fact-finding surveys are descriptive in nature. The next, the opposite of descriptive research is analytic research. Analytic research is when you have a problem in hand and you find solutions to those problems by way of analysis. The next is qualitative research. Qualitative research is something that aims at finding out the quality, or rather you can say that it is non-numeric. For example, if I say, why do people buy a particular brand of soap? Then that will seek responses in the form of, this is a soap that lathers well, or this is a soap that it kills germs and all that. So that is qualitative in nature. On the other hand, you have quantitative research. This is numeric data. It is in the form of numbers. For example, now taking the same example means I just want you to understand that the same type of research question or a research based on a particular problem can be both qualitative and quantitative at the same time. So the same thing can be quantitative when I ask how many people use Lifebuoy, how many people use Dettol and all that. So that is in the form of numbers. So that is quantitative research. However, in the recent past, researchers have actually clubbed both. For some point of time, a research can be qualitative and then it can become quantitative. So that is what is called as a mixed methods research. Alright, and this whole process of including both the qualitative and the quantitative aspect is called as triangulation. This is an important question, so you can make a note of it. The next is fundamental research. Fundamental research is also called as basic research. Fundamental research is when you are developing a theory of your own. For example, when Newton found out that when an apple drops down, it is based on the law of gravity. At that time, that was an example of a fundamental research because it was the development of a new theory or a concept. Alright, the next is applied research. For example, if I have to apply the same concept of Newton and find out why a lift that goes down and that comes down, that goes up and that comes down, why is there a change in the force and the workload and all that, that becomes applied research because you're using Newton's law of gravitation to explain the working of a lift. Alright. So, when concepts are applied to solve present day problems, then it is called as applied research. The next is conceptual research. Conceptual research, as you can understand from the name, conceptual research is based on concepts or ideas. Okay. The next is experimental research. I'll start by giving you an example. Supposing if you are a researcher and you want to find out if storytelling has a positive impact on the understanding, or if you want to find out if it improves the analytical skills. So this is your research problem, research question. Does storytelling enhance the analytical skills? So if it were an experimental research design, what the researcher is supposed to do is divide the sample into two groups, the experimental group and the control group. The intervention of the researcher in the form of using stories in the classroom is actually implemented in the experimental group and not in the control group. Control group is as normal as always. But the researcher's intervention takes place in the experimental group. And this intervention is measured as against the control group. And when you compare these two, it is said that you will find a difference in the experimental group. If the difference is positive, then it says that it has a positive impact. If it is negative, then it has a negative impact. So, when the sample is divided into two groups and when there is the intervention of the researcher in the experimental group, that is called as experimental research. You can actually watch the video because there are a lot of types of experimental research too, like quasi-experiment, pre-experiment and all that. I have discussed them in the video. Now, moving forward, other general types of research. Now, the first classification is based on time period. Based on time period, you can divide them as longitudinal research and cross-sectional research. For example, if a particular research runs over several time periods, for example, say 1 year or 1.5 years, then it is longitudinal in nature. For example, if I want to find out the teaching methods used in Tamil Nadu, alright, it means to say that a teaching method that is used today will differ from one that was used yesterday and the one that will be used tomorrow. So, it is important for the researcher to find out the teaching methods that have been used over a long period of time. So, this makes it longitudinal, alright. When it takes place over a longer period of time, then it is called as longitudinal research. The next is cross-sectional research. Cross-sectional research is like what we have learned in botany and zoology. You take a potato or a tomato and then you divide it, and then that is called as a cross-section. So, a cross-sectional research is done only for a single time period. It is very confined, right? It is confined to one particular time period. For example, does COVID-19 affect older people more than the younger lot? Now, assuming that COVID-19 will not last for long, and that is also a hope for all of us, COVID-19 is a problem that will exist probably for say 1 month or 2 months, hopefully even 4 weeks, alright. So, this is cross-sectional because it is based only on a small time period, alright. It is based on a smaller time period, so that makes the difference between longitudinal and cross-sectional research. Longitudinal research is for a longer period of time and cross-sectional research is for a shorter period of time, say 2 months or 3 months, alright. Moving on, the next is types of research based on the environment. Based on the environment, you can actually classify them as field research and laboratory research. Field research is also called as field work, like you get into the fields, that's to say that you work not in the lab or in a confined place, but in the actual setting where the problem is. For example, if a researcher wants to learn more about tribal languages, it means that the researcher will have to stay with the tribal people in order to understand their language, in order to learn more about their language. Probably there is a relationship with language and the culture. So, everything can be understood well only when the researcher stays with the tribal people. So, therefore, a field study is of more importance when you are learning tribal languages or a particular culture or something like that. In that case, it is called as a field research. So, it most often involves participant observation because it tends to be ethnographic in nature too. Alright. The next is laboratory research. Laboratory research is something that takes place in a controlled environment. For example, imagine tomorrow India comes up with a vaccine for COVID-19. Fingers crossed, hope that happens. So, a vaccine can be found out only in controlled settings. It happens only in the laboratory. It does not happen in the open space. Alright. So, that is an example of a laboratory research. Now, moving on to more common types of research, the first is clinical research. Clinical research, as the name signifies, it takes place in the field of healthcare services. Now, if for example, you have to find out the symptoms, the prevention of a particular disease, the treatment of a disease, then all that comes under clinical research. The next is exploratory research. Exploratory research is developing a hypothesis rather than testing a hypothesis. Now, let me explain. Exploratory, as the name signifies, you are exploring something. There's not something that you are going to come up with or a solution to a problem or something like that. You are just going to explore what actually exists. Now, the example which is up on your slide, what are the assessment methods followed in India? This is exploratory in nature simply because you are just going to find out what are the assessment systems which are followed in India, or what are the assessment methods that are in place in India. That's all. Alright. So, that research is called as exploratory research, where you only develop a hypothesis and it is not hypothesis testing, because you are not going to find out if using technology is going to be helpful in the class. You are just going to find out if technology is being used in the class. Alright. The next is historical research. Historical research deals with past events. Okay. It deals with history. So, for example, research on civilizations, the Roman civilization, the Harappan civilization, all that comes under historical research. The next is philosophical research. Philosophical research is qualitative in nature, alright, because you are analyzing philosophical concepts. For example, if somebody comes up with a new understanding of Socrates, then that is philosophical in nature. The next is ethnographic research. As I already told you, field research tends to be ethnographic in nature. Ethnographic research, it comes from the term ethnography, the study of culture and the way people live. So, ethnographic research deals with the process of studying and describing culture. You describe culture. For example, research on tribal people, as I already told you, you have to find out the nuances of culture. Why do people behave in a certain way? Is it their culture? Alright? So, such things will have to be answered. So, that is ethnographic in nature. Or even for that matter, students from the low income group, do they perform well? Then in that case, you will have to find out the background of the learner. Then even that is ethnographic in nature. The next is case study research. Now, the term case is very prevalent, especially in the present scenario. Each day we increase the number of cases rising or decreasing or something like that. So, a case is a term that is most often used in the field of medicine. Right? So, a case study is when you pick up a particular case. Right? A case is just one thing. You pick up that particular case and you give a detailed account of one or more cases, and that is called as case study research. For example, I am a researcher, I am interested in the behavior of teenagers. So, I will pick up 2 to 3 teenagers and then find out, why do these people behave like this, or do all teenagers behave like this? What are the common behaviors? What are the traits? So, all that comes under case study research. The next is market research. As I told you in the beginning, it deals with market trends, finding out market trends, or the purchasing policies, producing and selling of products, everything. Alright. Next is operations research. Operations research is when you use mathematical and logical techniques to find solutions. For example, there are business problems. For example, profit maximization, cost maximization. You want to maximize your profit. At that time, there are few mathematical and logical operations that are to be in place for you to find out. Alright, that is called as operations research. The next is causal comparative research. This is a very important type of research as far as the NTA NET examination is concerned, because there could be a question on this. So, it's causal and comparative at the same time, which means to say that you are finding out the cause. Alright, there are two things. You're finding out the cause and also comparing both. Alright, what causes what, and also comparison. That is what is there on the definition up on your slides now. Aims at determining the cause or the consequences of differences that exist. There are two things, differences exist between those two things. What are those differences? How do those differences affect each other? How different are they? So, that is called as causal comparative research. The example which is there, relationship between the number of years of experience and job satisfaction. Supposing if I am a researcher and if I have to say that people with higher number of years of experience are more satisfied with their jobs, then it is causal, meaning to say that your number of years of experience, they affect the job satisfaction or the amount of your satisfaction. And also, job satisfaction can be compared to be directly proportional with the number of years of experience. Alright. The next is a very important type of research, because questions have been asked a number of times based on action research in your NET exam question papers. Action research, it is a term that was coined by Kent Levin. There is action taking place in action research. Alright. It is meant to solve existing problems. So, these are immediate solutions to existing problems. And action research is highly contextualized. Okay. It takes place in a particular context. And also it has a predefined process. To be very careful with the process, because the process has been asked umpteen number of times. And an example for action research is on your slide right now. Action research for doing away with the habit of plagiarism on the part of the researcher, or how do researchers overcome plagiarism, can be done as an action research, because you will be picking up 10 to 15 research scholars working on them, and that is an action research. And action research is collaborative in nature, meaning to say that I am a teacher, I face a problem in my class, there is another teacher in the adjacent classroom, both of us are in this face the same problem. So, both of us work in collaboration to solve a particular problem. Then that is called as action research. Alright. Now, you have to be very careful with the diagram. In fact, it's good that you remember it because that might be a question, and it has been a question earlier also. So, action research and the steps of action research. The first thing in any research is generally to identify the problem. You just identify what is the problem, what am I going to work on. The next is devise a plan. So, now that you have devised your problem, you have identified your problem, you have to devise a plan. What is my plan of action? So, you devise a plan and then act to implement your plan. You have a plan in place. Now, you have to work out the plan, you have to implement the plan. So, that is the next step. After the implementation, there is a lot of data that you collect. You need to analyze all the data, and then finally you have to reflect. Alright. So, this is the process where you plan, act, observe and reflect. Alright. You can remember it using TAOR or something like that. It's up to you. Now, moving on to the next lot. So far so good, we have actually completed the types of research. Alright. Although in brief, it should be clear by now. The next is research methods and research methodology, the difference between them, and we'll be moving into the research process. So, research methods. What are research methods? Research methods are techniques which are used by the researcher to conduct research. Right? So, research methods involve techniques. So, what's research methodology? Research methodology is the way of systematically solving a research problem. You have a problem in hand. What are the various steps you use to solve a particular problem is what constitutes the methodology. Alright. So, you have methodology at the top, and then you have methods, and methods, under methods you have a lot of techniques. Alright. Okay. So, up on your slide now is a question which I would like all of you to try and answer. It is, dash research is intended to determine the cause or of the consequences of differences among groups of people. Action research, experimental research, causal comparative research, case study research. Alright, try and answer these questions. The answer is actually causal comparative research. The most important terms here are cause, consequences and differences. Alright, as I already told you, causes, there are two causes, or there are two things which act upon each other, and there are also differences among these two groups. Alright. Okay. Yeah, I see a lot of you coming up with the correct answers. The next is research process. Alright. Now, the flowchart which is up on your screen now is from Kothari's book on research methodology. I thought that this would be helpful in remembering all the stages of research, because most often, most of the question papers have questions asking the respondents to arrange these steps in order. Alright. So, the first is defining research problem, review of literature, formulate hypothesis, and then research design, collection of data, analysis of data, interpretation and reporting of the results. Let us see one by one. First is formulating the research problem. The researcher, by way of observation, finds out that there are problems existing in various aspects or various walks of life. That, if researchable, is a research problem. Alright. Research problem can generally be divided into two types. The first, it relates to the states of nature. Why is it so? How is it? All those things are the first category. It relates to the states of nature. The second relates to the relationship between the variables. There are two things. For example, eating junk food and obesity. Does eating junk food lead to obesity? You're comparing both the variables. You're finding out the relationship between both the variables. Alright. So, that could be the second type. Now, there are few things which a researcher has to keep in mind while formulating the research problem. One thing is that the subject shouldn't be overdone. People who have worked a lot, the subject shouldn't be something that people have overdone. Okay. And then avoid choice of any controversial subject. Avoiding controversial subjects is good anyways. So, same is the case with research too. The next is too vague, too broad and too narrow problems are to be avoided. For example, I want to find out the condition of schools in India. that is too broad a topic to be researched in say 5 years or 4 years. So it shouldn't be too broad. And also the research question is too vague. Now what is the condition of schools in India? It is too vague because in India, which part of India, northern India, southern India, school level, which school level, middle school level, kindergarten, or what are you talking about? The next, it shouldn't be too narrow. Like if I say I am going to research on the condition of schools in my area, alright, say Adyar or Gindi or something like that, it is a very small place, okay. So a research problem should not be too broad, too vague or too narrow. The next is review of literature. Literature is everything that has been done on your particular topic of research. So review of literature is studying everything and then applying your brains on the literature that is available to find out a research gap. So this review of literature can be done in two parts. The first is conceptual review of literature and empirical review of literature. Conceptual review of literature is reviewing all concepts and theories that exist related to your research. For example, if I have to say, I will pick up the same example which I told you earlier, the impact of junk food on physical fitness of a person. All literature that regards to the physical fitness of a person, junk food, the impacts of junk food, everything will come under the conceptual review of literature. Supposing if a person like me has already done research on the impact of junk food and physical fitness, then that is called as empirical research. Imagine he or she has already selected a sample, worked on them for quite some time and then arrived at results. It is an already worked piece of research. That is called as an empirical review of literature. Alright. So this deals with concepts, and empirical review of literature deals with literature that has already been done or work that has already been done in the same field. Alright. Next is formulation of hypothesis. So what is hypothesis? Hypothesis is nothing but a tentative assumption about the expected outcome of research. So this might be my outcome. So every time we do something, we assume that this will happen. So that assumption is called as hypothesis, or rather it is a logical guess. Supposing if I work on junk food and obesity, my hypothesis will be eating junk food leads to obesity. Alright, that is a logical guess. Or it could be eating junk food does not lead to obesity. That could also be an assumption. Now, hypothesis is divided into two types, alternate hypothesis and null hypothesis. When I say or when I predict a negative impact, if I say no, this will not have an impact, then that is called as the null hypothesis. When I predict anything else, a positive impact or something, then that is called as the alternate hypothesis. I will tell you why it is like that. It is important that researchers always neglect the null hypothesis. Alright, good researchers neglect the null hypothesis. Therefore, it is important that I assume that eating junk food will not lead to obesity, which I actually know that it will. So when I assume that it won't, then it is a null hypothesis that will eventually get rejected. Alright, and also the hypothesis is supposed to be specific and limited. Now I can't just go about saying eating junk food will lead to a lot of obesity. Obesity in whom? In children, in adults, in middle-aged people? In that way, in that sense, a hypothesis is supposed to be specific and also limited. Now, why do you need a hypothesis? What happens when you don't have a hypothesis is, you tend to ramble around. Supposing if you don't have a hypothesis, you don't know what you're working on. I just have an idea that I'm working on junk food. I'll do anything that is based on junk food. Right? So, it helps the researcher in delimiting the area of research. I will know what I'm working on. Right? So, the researcher will be on the right track if there is a hypothesis that has been formulated. And the same hypothesis in the form of a question is actually called as a research question. The next is research design. Research design is actually a very important step because here is where you actually outline the whole of your research. For example, the data collection tools. How will I collect my data? How will I analyze my data? Who will be my sample? How will I be selecting my sample? What will be my sample size? Everything comes under research design. You're formulating the research design means you're outlining the whole of your research. So there are few things which you have to take into consideration. Probably the money availability. How much money do I have in hand to conduct the research? What is the time that I have in hand? By when should I finish my research? By when should I finish collecting my data? Alright. The availability of the skills of the researcher. For example, if I want to use an interview as a data collection tool, I must be versatile in interviewing. I must have sufficient interviewing skills. Alright. If I want to use a questionnaire, what are the means by which I will be using the questionnaire? What are the means by which I will be collecting data? Will I be sending it by email? Will I be going in person? That is the means of collecting data. The next is sampling. Sampling is an entirely different section. We will deal with it in detail. Next is data collection. As I already told you, how am I going to collect my data? How am I going to go about with the whole of the process? Alright. The next is determining the sample design. Now, imagine I am working on video games. Alright. Video games. So, a lot of people in the whole of the world play video games. PUBG, Candy Crush, a lot of them play video games. So, all people in the world playing video games form a part of the universe. They are called the population because everybody stands a chance to be a part of my research. But you get that it is impossible to conduct research on everybody playing video games, right? So, it is not possible. Therefore, the researcher selects a particular group which is a representative of the population, and that is called as a sample. Okay. So, items selected for the research technically constitute what is called as the sample, and there are different types of sampling. We will deal with that in detail. The next is collecting data. Two types of data, primary data and secondary data. Primary data is data which you collect, the first hand information which you collect in the form of experiments or surveys. Alright, and there are different tools using which you can collect data. Up on your slide you have questionnaires, interviews, schedules, observations. You can use case studies. There are a lot of data collection tools. The next is execution of the project. Now, you have everything in place, your data collection tools, you have everything, you have collected, you know how to collect data, you know how to go about with it. The next is execution. You actually work according to your plan. Alright. Only if the execution is on correct lines will you get data which is reliable and also which is dependable. Alright. Next is analysis of data. You have already collected data. And now you need to analyze the data which you have collected. There are three basic steps or other types in which you analyze data. The first is coding. Say I found out how many people eat samosas, puffs and a lot more, and already it's snacks time, so I am picking up this example. Imagine you have that data with you. So you know this person eats samosa, this person eats puff and whatever. You have to code all that data in the form of symbols. Supposing if you give 1 for the person eating samosas, you give a star for the person eating puffs, you give something else for the person eating something, alright. So that is called as coding, where the data is transformed into symbols that can be tabulated and counted. So now at the end of your coding process, if I come and ask you how many people eat samosas, you will just have to count the number of ones you have and say how many people eat samosas, alright. The next is editing. Editing comes in place when you have a lot of open-ended questions in your questionnaire, or you have fillers in an interview. For example, people say something but then you don't hear it properly, or people don't write the spelling correctly. So you have minute mistakes which the people make while responding to your questionnaire or your interview or anything else. So you have to edit those mistakes. So that is called as editing. Alright. The next is tabulation. As I already told you, you have transformed the whole of your data in the form of symbols. Now these symbols need to be put in the form of tables, and that is called as tabulation. Okay. The next is hypothesis testing. Hypothesis, as I already told you, have an assumption, and the data is tested many times against the hypothesis. Alright, you have a hypothesis. Now if I say does using portfolio assessment have an impact on students learning mathematics, for example, then you actually have the hypothesis. Yes, it does help students in learning mathematics, or it doesn't help students learning mathematics. But then you have a lot of statistical tools. For example, regression analysis, correlational analysis, chi-square test, t-test, f-test, z-test and a lot more, against using which you can test the data against the hypothesis. Alright. So that is called as hypothesis testing. And when you test the hypothesis a number of times, you will arrive at generalizations. And these generalizations later become theories. Alright, the hypothesis is tested several times and you will arrive at generalizations which can be called a theory. Alright, the next is preparation of report, or rather the thesis writing stage, which is actually a very meticulously done stage in the whole of the research process. Alright, so this could be an important question, and I recommend that all of you know all the parts in a thesis, starting from the title page till the appendices, what is necessary, what is not necessary, what is a mandatory part in a thesis. I suggest that all of you somehow learn up all those things. But then primarily the layout is, you have preliminary pages. Preliminary pages probably include the index page, the acknowledgement and all that. The main text is your 5 to 6 chapters. Right? The end matter is again your bibliography, references, works cited, however you want to call it. But however, there are also differences among the three, and also you can have your appendices. So they constitute what is called as the end matter. So this is the end of the first part of the presentation. But then we'll also have to look at data collection tools and sampling. Alright, so first now we'll take up data collection tools. So what are the various data collection tools? So, and as I already told you, we'll be talking about data collection tools, the primary data collection tools, and not the secondary data collection tools, because the secondary data collection tools include journals, articles, or anything that has already been worked out. Alright, so data collection tools. The first is a questionnaire. Alright, questionnaire is the most popular and most common type of data collection, and even during this time of lockdown we receive a lot of messages saying answer this questionnaire, that questionnaire and all that. So it is a very common form of collecting data. You know why? It's because it is cost effective, and it is also free from the bias of the interviewer, in the sense that there's no person who's going to put the words into your mouth because you're alone when you're filling the questionnaire. That doesn't happen in an interview. Alright, and also low return rate of the questionnaire means as a researcher, even I have sent so many questionnaires to a lot of teachers, but honestly speaking, a lot of them don't return those questionnaires. Alright, so there is always the threat of a low return rate. People don't fill your questionnaire just like that. They tell, we need time, we need this, we need that. Alright, so that is why a questionnaire, even though is preferred, but it is still a time taking process. Alright, and also the problem is a questionnaire can be used only for educated respondents. You can't use a questionnaire for every Tom, Dick and Harry, because it can be used only by people who can read and write. Alright, up on your slide is an image of WhatsApp. So every time I make a WhatsApp call, a video call or anything like that, you have that particular thing saying rate this call. Although it was a bad call, every time it asks you for rate this call on a scale, and then you have 5 stars. That is a form of a questionnaire. A questionnaire is also used to get feedback. Alright, from the respondents. It is also used to get feedback from the respondents. The next is pilot study. What is pilot study? Pilot study is when you have a questionnaire, it is ready, it is all done, and then you want to find out if the questionnaire has mistakes, and then if there are mistakes you need to rectify them. So that is done using pilot study. You collect some 5 to 10 people, give them the questionnaire, administer the questionnaire, and then you find out what the flaws in your questionnaire are, you rectify them, then that is called as pilot study. Okay. Then there are 2 types of questionnaires. These are broad classifications again. There are still more classifications, however. There are 2 broad classifications, closed-ended questionnaires and open-ended questionnaires. Closed-ended questionnaires, like the one which is up on your slide now, it is an example of a closed-ended questionnaire because you don't get to answer anything in detail or even in 2-3 lines. Alright, you just have to say yes, no, no, yes, no. Alright. So, closed-ended questions are that which don't seek a response from the respondents, however, in the form of words. Open-ended questions are where you will have to write responses. Okay. Supposing if you have a question in your questionnaire that asks you, is teacher training a part of your college or the training which you receive from college? If so, mention what are they. People just say yes, no, but if they say yes, they have to mention what are the various types of trainings which they receive from their management. Alright. The next is types of questions. What are the various types of questions that could be asked? Now, every time I go to Domino's, after finishing a good amount of eating pizza and all that, they send me a link saying, now rate your experience with Domino's. And then it has a series of questions. Now, how was the food? How was the hospitality? How was the cleanliness in the restaurant or anything like that? They give me a scale, 1 to 10. I have to say if it is 10 or 5 or 4 or 3. If I say it is 10, then it means that I had an excellent experience with Domino's. Alright. So that is called as a rating scale. You rate your experiences or you rate anything that is asked. Alright. The next is a ranking scale. Ranking scale, if I want to find out if you prefer to use WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter or any site like that. And if you say Instagram number 1, WhatsApp number 2, it means that you prefer using Instagram more than using WhatsApp. Alright. So that is called as a ranking scale where you rank the various parameters. Alright. The next is the Likert scale. Likert scale is the most commonly used kind of closed-ended questionnaire type of questions. Alright. This is where you have the 5 options: always, never, rarely, sometimes, all those things, or agree, strongly disagree, partially disagree and all those things. Alright. So that is called as the Likert scale. Moving on, the next is interview. Yeah. Now, interview is an act of turn taking. Now, this is my favorite example in the whole of the presentation. Imagine there is a cricket match that is going to start. You have the toss and then you have 2 captains. One, probably the winning captain, most often Mahendra Singh Dhoni. And then you have another captain. After the toss, the person who is the MC, he asks Dhoni to come forward and speak. Now, right, the interviews can be divided into many types. The first is single interview and multiple interview. When you interview a person for the first time and then leave it there, then that is a single interview. Multiple interview, today you interview a person, after 2 months you interview the same person to find out if anything has changed, then that is called as a multiple interview. The next is a structured interview and an unstructured interview. Structured interview is when, suppose Dhoni is there and then the person is asking him questions and he asks him questions like, what is it, what is your team, have you made changes in your team or anything like that. And then our captain says, yes, we have made few changes because this person is out with an injury. And then what will be the response of the person asking the question? He will not ask the second question which is there on the list. He will ask a question related to the injury. Now, how did the injury happen or what was it? And things like that. So that is called as a semi-structured interview. Now, if the person is going to ask the same questions as it is, then it is called as a structured interview. Supposing if I am a fan and I have to go and ask Dhoni few questions, I'll ask whatever I feel like asking. So in that case, it is an unstructured interview. I might not have an interview checklist. These are the questions that I should ask, might not be there. Then in that case, it is called as an unstructured interview. But in cases where you have a set of questions, you ask them, then that person says something else, you're distracted, you ask another question related to the response which that person gave, then that is called as a semi-structured interview. Alright, hope that's clear. The next is focus group interview. Focus group interview is when, supposing if you have to interview 100 teachers, you can't interview all 100 teachers because you don't have the time to do that. Now, you divide the teachers into groups of 6 or 7, maximum of 12 in each group. And then you conduct interview for each group. Then that is called as a focus group interview. But then one problem which is there inherent in a focus group interview is that you will not be able to associate the response with the respondent. You will not be able to know who said what, because there are a lot of people who are talking at the same time. You will not be able to attribute a particular response to the same respondent. Alright. The next is a telephonic interview. This is a very convenient and in vogue form of data collection which is called as telephonic interview. We just call the person up and then have an interview and then it is done. The next is observation. Observation, as I already told you, in place of an ethnographic research or a field research, it is very important. It is a systematic description of events, behavior, artifacts and everything which is in a particular social setting. Now, before starting an observation, what are you supposed to keep in mind? What am I observing, or what should I be observing? How should I be observing? Do I have an observation template? Do I have to stick to the template? How accurate is the template, or how accurate is my observation? Alright, because observation might be biased at times. Alright. Again, observation is divided into a number of types. I have classified them into groups of 2 because they are dichotomies. The first is structured observation and unstructured observation. Structured observation, similar to a structured interview and an unstructured interview, is when you actually have an observation template, and based on the template you are going to observe. Then that is a structured interview. It is an unstructured interview when you don't have an observation, you just enter some random place and observe everything that you find, or probably whatever you think is necessary. Then that is called as unstructured observation. The next is participant observation and non-participant observation. Participant observation is when on your slide you have a picture that shows non-participant observation, because there are actually 3 people who are talking and 1 people who is just observing. Alright. Then that is non-participant observation, because you are not a part of the group which you are observing. Then participant observation is when this person who is there on the corner, if he enters the discussion of the group, and then if they all are going to discuss, and if he is going to still observe, then he is a participant observer. Alright. Participant observation is generally, for example, if you have to say, I belong to the low income group. Say I belong to the low income group, and if I have to observe people belonging to the low income group, then in that case I am a participant observer, because I am myself a member in the group which I am observing. Alright. The next is controlled observation and non-controlled observation. Controlled observation, you can relate this well with medicine. People say he is under observation. What does it mean? He is being observed. He is isolated from everybody, and then he is observed under controlled setup. Alright. He is isolated and he is being observed. It is a controlled observation. When you as a researcher are in control of the various parameters that could possibly affect the observation, in that case it is called as a controlled observation. The next is non-controlled observation. Non-controlled observation is when you have no say in the environment. It is just there and you just observe it. For example, if you are working on tribal people, as I already told you, you will have to visit the tribal people. It is not under your control. The environment, the ambience, nothing is under your control. You just observe as it exists. So that is called as non-controlled observation. The next is covert observation and overt observation. The first is covert observation. Imagine I am a researcher. I don't tell you, you are a part of the observation, you are a part of the team which I am observing. I don't tell you I am observing you, but I still observe you. Then that is covert observation. Where the researcher does not disclose his identity or being an observer is called as a covert observation. Supposing in another observation, I am a researcher, I come up to you and I say, I am going to observe you, hey look, I am going to observe you, do whatever you want now. And then if you are going to observe, then that is called as an overt observation, because the people whom you are observing are aware of the fact that he or she is being observed. Right? The next is schedule. There is not much difference between a schedule and a questionnaire. The only thing is that questionnaire is filled by the respondents themselves, but then a schedule is filled by a worker or probably a deputant whom you depute in order to collect data for you. Alright. This is quite expensive because you have to pay each of the enumerators who are collecting the responses. This means to say that people give the responses, there is a person who is listening, and then the person who is listening will write down those responses. Alright. That is all that has to do with schedules. The difficulty is that it might cost you more than administering a questionnaire, because it is expensive and you have to pay the enumerators who are traveling around for you. Alright. Next is the case study method. Case study method is when you find out individual factors, like you work on individuals, for example an institution or a group of people or a person or an individual, and you find out what happens, or whether you can even have two individuals, compare these two individuals and find out. All that comes under a case study method. But the problem is that you assume that these results can be generalized. There is an assumption lying at the back that there is uniformity in nature. Now, the same way I behave, alright, I behave might not be the same way in which another person might behave. But the general assumption is that all teenagers or all people behave in the same way. Alright, so that is one drawback, because these results are not generalizable enough. Alright, and it is also it also consumes more time and more energy, because you have only one person and you have to observe everything that is related to that one person. Alright, sampling is also a very important topic as far as your NET examination is concerned, and there is a question every time in almost all the shifts regarding types of research is one important thing, and then data collection is another important thing, and you could also have questions based on research process and also on sampling. Apart from this, you will also need to concentrate on ICT and research, and also thesis writing. As I already told you, you need to know the various parts of research, the MLA, the APA, of course the abbreviations. They ask from simple questions to complicated questions, but then I think sampling techniques, now if you get a hang of the whole thing, it will be very helpful in your examinations. Types of sampling. Sampling is basically divided into two types: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability sampling, as I already told you, you should be remembering the concepts of population and sample. Probability sampling is when every person in the population stands a chance to be a person, or stands a chance to belong to the sample in which you are conducting the research, then that is called as probability sampling. It is technically based on the law of probability, meaning to say that there are people, everybody, means there are 100 people, the 9th person or the 10th person or the 99th person, anybody can be a part of the sample, then that is called as probability sampling. Alright. The next is non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling is when not everybody can be a part of the research, because there are certain constraints. We will look at them in detail. Now, moving on to the types of probability sampling. I have only picked up the types, or rather the most oft asked questions. Alright, I have picked up from the point of view of the examination. However, there are many of these types of samples. If you are very interested, or if you have genuine interest like that of a researcher, you can actually check out each of them. But for now, I will just give you pictorial representations of the samples as far as possible. So, the first is simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, area sampling. The first is simple random sampling. Now, look at the figure closely. Alright, you have 12 participants, and these participants will come till the end, I will tell you. You have 12 participants, and these 12 participants, out of the 12 participants, you have picked out 2, 5, 8, 10 at random. There is no rhyme or reason why you have picked up 2 or 5 or 8 or 10. Alright, so that is called a simple random sampling. How is this generally done? This is generally done by picking up chits from a hat. You write these numbers on a hat, inside a hat, you put them inside a hat, and then you pick up numbers. So that is simple random sampling. It is done at random, simply at random. Alright. The next is systematic random sampling. So, systematic means it has some methodology. Alright. Now, you might as well say that it is method in madness. Alright. So, it is systematic random sampling. It is systematic and it is also random at the same time. For example, I have to pick up in multiples of 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. If I pick out samples in that order, then it is systematic random sampling. Although it is random, it is still based on some set pattern. Alright, I am picking up in multiples of 3. After 3 I pick up 6, I do not pick up 5. It is based on systematic, it is systematic selection, but still it is random. Alright. So, in the example which is up on your slide, you have samples which are selected for every third person. For example, you select 2 and then you leave out 2 people, you select the third, you leave out 2 people, you select the third, you leave out 2 third, you leave out 2 third. So that is the pattern, alright. So that is called as systematic random sampling. The next is stratified random sampling. Supposing if you have 12, throughout we have been having 12, so we have 12 participants and you divide these participants into strata or rather levels. For example, 1, 10, 12 in one strata, 2, 4, 6 in another strata, 7, 8, 11 in another, 3, 5, 9 in another. Alright, you have divided the 12 participants or your population into strata. Alright, and from each strata you pick up certain amounts. Alright, here you have picked out 10, 2, 8, 5 at random. Alright, so that is called as stratified random sampling. You divide them based on strata and then pick out at random. Alright, the next is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is when you have 12, the population, the count is 12, you divide them into clusters. Cluster 1 has 1 and 2, cluster 2 has 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12. So you have formed 6 clusters and you select the cluster as it is. Alright, unlike stratified, you select the whole of the cluster. Imagine 5, 6 is one cluster, 11, 12 is another cluster. You select both the clusters. So that is called as cluster sampling. And I have seen a lot of students coming up with doubts on what is the difference between stratified and cluster sampling. For them, there is another slide coming up. Cluster sampling is when you divide the population in the form of clusters and select the whole of the cluster. Is that clear? The next, stratified sampling on the other hand, is when you divide the population into strata and divide certain amounts from each of the strata. Alright? Hope that's clear. The next is area sampling. Now this is a screenshot from Google Maps. Now I am working on this particular area, say the area that's next to AG Hospital, the petrol bunk and Phillips Hospital and all that. So that is my area. Area sampling is generally based on geographical divisions. Alright, and area sampling it might as well be a systematic random sampling. Say in case I select the third street in every area, or the first, the third, the fifth, the odd numbers, those areas. In that case, it can be area sampling as well as systematic random sampling. Alright. Now, moving on to non-probability sampling, what are the most common types? Convenience sampling, snowball sampling, judgment sampling and quota sampling. First is convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is when it is done on the basis of the convenience of the researcher. What am I convenient with? What can I work with? Probably I cannot travel down south, so I eliminate that possibility of traveling down south. So I don't go there because it is not convenient to me. I live in Chennai, so I can only travel in and around Chennai. So that is called as convenience sampling, when it is based on the convenience of the researcher. The next is judgment sampling. Judgment sampling is when it is based on the discretion of the researcher. By discretion, I mean to say that it will be good if this person is a part of my research. This person should be a part of my research. Then in that case, it is based on the judgment. You can see the researcher, he is the abstract researcher there. He is actually imagining, he is actually thinking of people who if a part of the research, could be a better opportunity of getting good results. Alright. Then in that case, it is called as judgment sampling. The next is quota sampling. Quota sampling is when quota, as the nomenclature itself signifies, it is based on categories. For example, you have enrollment into colleges based on quota, sports quota and a lot more. So that when it is done based on quota, it is called as quota sampling. Next is snowball sampling. Snowball sampling, I have also given you the image of snowballing, the game snowballing. It is arranged, if you have played the game, you would know that it is arranged in an ascending order. It moves from 1, 3, 5 and like that. So, snowball sampling is when you see the first one is closer. So, it means to say that Snowball sampling is when you have people whom you know based on the researcher's acquaintance. You have got yourself acquainted with few people, so they will be a part of your research, and this number increases, right? Now one person knows 3 other people, so they will be the next, and those 3 people know 5 other people, so they will be the next. So it progresses based on your acquaintances. So that is called as snowball sampling. Alright. So thanks a lot for listening to all that which I said so far. Hope it was helpful. And the next thing which we'll be talking about is a few previous year questions. The first question is up on your slide now. The style of writing a thesis and research article has to be dash. Creative in so far as diction is concerned, scientific in respect to language used, mechanical in so far as placement of figures and tables is concerned, variable in respect of referencing. Alright, B is the correct answer. Alright, yeah. Up on your slide is the second question. In which of the following research methods an empirico-inductive paradigm is involved? I have not told you about the empirico-inductive paradigm, but I was assuming that a lot of people know what is inductive and what is deductive. However, let me also explain in terms of research. Inductive is everything that is qualitative, and deductive is most often quantitative. Okay. Now, the word empirico is not as important because empirico just means that it is verifiable, it is testable, but then inductive is at most importance because when it is inductive, it means that it is qualitative. When it is deductive, it means that it is quantitative. Now, please try and answer this question. You have various options also there, A, B, C, B, C, D. So, it is quite a longer question compared to the previous one. Now, in this case, I suggest that you go for the elimination options because you actually need to eliminate answers which could probably be quantitative in nature. Alright, the correct answer is 3, A, B and D. It's probably because I have not explained ex post facto method. Ex post facto method is you find out or if you weigh the consequences of a particular situation after everything is done. Now imagine after COVID-19, if I have to come up and say what has COVID-19 done, how are we feeling the repercussions of COVID-19 or something like that, then that is ex post facto research because I am aiming to find the effects of COVID-19 after the event is actually over. Alright. So, ex post facto research, it is kind of quantitative because after it is done, you are weighing down the effects of the repercussions. Your answer is A, B and D. This is because A is ethnographic. Ethnographic, as I already told you, you are studying the culture. You are studying the reasons why people behave in certain ways. You are studying the culture, the behavior, everything with regard to the context in which it is happening. So, that tends to be more qualitative. Alright, and also case study method. A case study method, it can't be quantified. You can't say a teenager is arrogant. I mean, you can't quantify it. You can't say arrogant, 1 arrogant, 2 arrogant. It is not quantifiable. Alright. So, case study research, case study method is also inductive and also a narrative method. Narrative, as you can understand from the term itself, is narrative and it is not quantitative. Is that fine? An experimental method, as I already told you, it involves pre-test scores and post-test scores. You have 2 groups, experimental group and the control group. You compare their scores, you compare the performance, you compare pre-test, post-test of these 2 groups in an experimental method. So, obviously, it is going to be both quantitative and qualitative, if not only qualitative. Alright? The next question which is up on your slide now. This is actually this involves a lot of common sense. You just have to think and nothing else. A researcher intends to make use of ICT in his or her research. What considerations should weigh most in such a decision? First, appropriateness of the tool used, cost involved in procuring it, availability of tools in the department where research is to be taken, willingness of his or her supervisor to offer help, the company from which the ICT equipment has been procured. Just eliminate the one which you feel are not going to play a role while selecting ICT in his or her research. The answer is option 1, A, B and C. The next is This is a question that I have been repeating over and over again while I was talking to you about action research. Hope everybody gives the correct answer. Alright. In an intervention based action research process, which of the following is the usually recommended sequence? Alright. Plan, act, observe, reflect. Observe, plan, act and reflect. Reflect, act, plan and observe. Observe, act, reflect and plan. I also told you the keyword of PAOR for you to remember it easily. Plan, act, observe and reflect. And also the figure which was there, I also had the image on the slide. You identify the problem and then you plan, you act and implement your plan, you observe the results and then reflect on what the results are. Alright, so option 1 is the correct answer. I see a lot of you with the correct answers. Thanks a lot all of you, and hope it will help a lot of you in answering research aptitude questions.